In the year 2000, a struggling little startup walked into the headquarters of the biggest video rental company on Earth. They had a simple offer. Buy us. $50 million, and we're yours. The room went quiet. Then the executives laughed. They laughed a small, money-losing website right out of the building. That website was Netflix. 10 years later, that so-called joke would be worth billions, and the company that laughed at it would be bankrupt. This is the story of how Blockbuster, a giant with 9,000 stores, climbed to the top of the world and then destroyed itself from the inside. And the most shocking part? They didn't lose because they failed to see the future. They lost because they saw it clearly, built it with their own hands, and then threw it away. To understand how far Blockbuster fell, you first have to understand how high it climbed. The story begins in 1985 in Dallas, Texas, with a businessman named David Cook. His idea sounds obvious today, but back then it was revolutionary. One giant, brightly lit store packed with thousands of movies, open late and friendly for the whole family. People loved it. And Blockbuster didn't just grow, it exploded. Through the 1990s and into the 2000s, it became woven into everyday American life. Going to Blockbuster was something families did every single weekend. Walking the aisles on a Friday night, picking out a movie, grabbing snacks on the way home. It wasn't shopping, it was a ritual. At its absolute peak, Blockbuster ran more than 9,000 stores around the globe and employed around 84,000 people. For most Americans, there was a Blockbuster just minutes from their front door. It looked completely untouchable, but buried inside this empire was a single, ugly flaw. And here's the twist. It wasn't a weakness. It was one of the biggest sources of money the company had: late fees. If you brought a movie back even one day late, you paid a penalty. And across millions of customers, those penalties added up to something staggering, roughly $800 million every single year. Stop and think about what that really means. Blockbuster wasn't just making money by renting movies. It was making a fortune by punishing the very people who loved it. Customers hated late fees. They complained about them constantly. But Blockbuster couldn't let them go. The company had become addicted to the one thing its own customers despised. And that addiction was about to become fatal. Because while Blockbuster was busy counting its late fees, two men were quietly building the weapon that would take it all down. In 1997, Reed Hastings and Mark Randolph launched a tiny company called Netflix. There's a famous origin story you've probably heard. Supposedly, Hastings returned a copy of Apollo 13 late, got hit with a $40 late fee, and got so angry he decided to build a better way to rent movies. Now the founders have since admitted that story is partly a myth, a little too perfect to be completely true, but it captures something real. Because Netflix was designed from the ground up to destroy everything people hated about Blockbuster. No stores to drive to, no due dates to remember, and no late fees. Not ever. You paid one flat fee each month. You picked your movies on a website, and the DVDs arrived in your mailbox. When you were done, you dropped them back in the mail. No rushing, no penalties, no guilt. Netflix went straight for the one weakness Blockbuster refused to give up. And in the year 2000, while Netflix was still tiny and bleeding money, they took a gamble. They flew to Blockbuster's headquarters and offered to sell the entire company for just $50 million. Blockbuster's answer? No. To them, Netflix looked like a joke, a small, unprofitable website with no stores and no future. Why would the king of an entire industry buy that? It would become the most expensive no in the history of business. But here's the part almost nobody talks about. Blockbuster wasn't stupid. And they didn't just sit still and die. In fact, for one brief window, it actually looked like they were going to win. By 2004, the company had finally woken up. It launched its own service, Blockbuster Online, to take Netflix on directly. Then their CEO, a sharp operator named John Antioco, made two bold, aggressive moves. First, in 2005, he did something no one saw coming. He killed late fees. The single most hated thing about Blockbuster, gone overnight. And second, he launched a weapon Netflix simply could not copy. It was called Total Access. Here's why it was genius. With Total Access, you could order a DVD by mail, just like Netflix. But then you could walk into any physical Blockbuster store, hand it back, and instantly grab another movie. The same day, no waiting on the mail. It combined the convenience of online with thousands of real stores that Netflix just didn't have. And it worked. Blockbuster's online subscribers started climbing fast. For the first time, Netflix was genuinely scared. Think about the position Blockbuster was in. They had the famous brand. They had the stores. They had the money. And now, finally, they had the right strategy. They were catching up fast. All they had to do was hold their nerve and keep going. But they didn't. And the reason why is one of the most self-destructive decisions in corporate history. Because the truth is, Blockbuster wasn't beaten by Netflix. It was beaten by a war inside its own boardroom. All of that progress came at a brutal price. Killing late fees wiped out hundreds of millions of dollars in easy revenue. Building the online business burned through hundreds of millions more. Antioco was spending enormous amounts of money to win the future, and not everyone was on board. A powerful and famously ruthless investor named Icahn bought a massive stake in the company. And he clashed hard with Antioco over all this spending. A civil war broke out at the very top of Blockbuster. In 2007, after a bitter fight, Antioco was pushed out, and the man brought in to replace him, Jim Keyes, made the decision that sealed the company's fate. He reversed everything. He slashed the spending on the online business, the very thing that was working. He turned the focus back to the physical stores, and quietly, the late fees that Antioco had fought so hard to kill began to creep back. Really let that sink in. At the exact moment the entire world was racing online, the one company on the planet best positioned to crush Netflix turned around and sprinted back into the past. Blockbuster had seen the future. It had literally built the future with its own hands, and then, to protect the comfortable, easy money it already had, it walked away from it. After that, the collapse was fast and brutal. The 2008 financial crisis hit hard. Debt piled higher and higher, and customers kept walking away, pulled toward mail, toward streaming, toward the endless choice of the internet. Blockbuster's stores sat emptier and emptier. In September 2010, it was over. Blockbuster filed for bankruptcy. A company once worth billions, an empire of 9,000 stores, was finished. A year later, what little remained was sold off for around $320 million, a tiny fraction of what it used to be. And today, out of 9,000 stores, exactly one Blockbuster is left. A single, lonely shop in Bend, Oregon, kept alive almost like a museum for tourists to visit and remember what once was. Meanwhile, Netflix, the company Blockbuster could have bought for $50 million, is now worth hundreds of billions. So, what's the real lesson here? Blockbuster wasn't killed by technology. It wasn't even really killed by Netflix. It was killed by its own addiction to late fees and its refusal to destroy its old business before someone else did it for them. They saw the threat coming. They built the perfect solution, and then they abandoned it just to protect the easy money they were comfortable with. And that is the trap that destroys even the greatest companies. The stream of money you are most addicted to is very often the exact thing that will kill you. If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit subscribe, because next time we're putting another fallen giant on the table, and you will not believe how this one ends.